And welcome into the locker room this week. Gerhard and Chase here. We got a great show for you, and we're going to dive right into it with some college basketball. You know, it's our favorite time of the year, March Madness. You never know what's going to happen. Some huge things happened this past weekend in March Madness, and we'll start with the first. Michigan State getting upset. They were number 2 seed. Middle Tennessee came in and beat them on day one.
I mean, you said it earlier. This is obviously one of the best sporting events. And this the first round, really the second round too, showed us the reasons why. And the most stunning upset was the game you're talking about with Michigan State and Middle Tennessee State. But let's just keep in mind here, this wasn't a fluke. Middle Tennessee State came out and beat Michigan State, jumped out on them early, shot the ball really well. And I think that's what we're seeing with this tournament a lot, is a lot of great shooting. But I think that, you know, with most people, they treat Tom Izzo kind of like Nick Saban, one of those guys who will always have his team in contention.
Right.
And that busted a lot of brackets merely because of the fact that it's Michigan State, not because they're the 2 seed, because I think if it was Villanova or maybe Iowa State, it wouldn't be as big. But that kind of set the tone for the tournament, and it was obviously the biggest one so far. But what we see with this tournament all the time is that when the smaller schools win, they can't sustain it. And we saw that with Middle Tennessee State losing to Syracuse in the second round.
There's been several big upsets this year. How does the first round rank to some past years?
I don't want to be prisoner of the moment, but this has to be one of the best in 20, maybe 30 years. I don't have a long history to go back and date it against. But with upsets and buzzer beaters like the Northern Illinois or Northern Iowa, and Texas, and also with games like Gonzaga and Wichita State, they came out of the first 4 now, and then they made their way into the Sweet 16 as well. And a lot of the upsets kind of were the storylines in that first round, and then a lot of the favorites. Which favorites moved on? So teams like Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, North Carolina, Indiana. We'll get to see how these teams do later on, but the upsets are the beautiful part of the bracket. And you talk about teams like Arkansas Little Rock. I mean, who would have thought they would have won a first round game? That's what makes this tournament so magical, and I honestly think I had so much fun over the weekend watching these games. One of the best ones I've ever seen.
And another huge moment came Sunday night when we saw something that really has never been done before with Texas A&M. With their win.
It's kind of fitting. It's almost perfect the way that Sunday ended when you think of the way Thursday started. Because you encapsulate from 68, the round of 68, all the way to the Sweet 16, and you had a team that won on a miracle shot with Jesperson's shot with Northern Iowa beating Texas, and then to be up by 12 points with 44 seconds to play. And Texas A&M just fighting and scratching and clawing. And obviously Texas A&M is a team that we're rooting for here in the South because they're part of the SEC, and now the only team left in the SEC kind of carrying the banner for the conference. And just the way that those kids just never quit. And Billy Kennedy's guys, I mean, obviously they're the 3 seed, so they were expected to move on. But after Northern Iowa beat Texas the way they did, just to see that unbelievable epic fail at the end of the game. You hate it for those kids. You hate it for Northern Iowa, but you got to give all the credit to the Aggies.
You know, the Aggies had a great season in the SEC this year. From watching them and watching that happen, how do you see the future going at Texas A&M?
I think it's really bright, and I think that it's a good thing for the SEC. You know, when you look back at when the SEC first made the move with Mike Slive to get Texas A&M, everybody was thinking, well, maybe Clemson might have been a better pick, maybe Florida State might have been a better pick, but they went with Texas A&M mainly because of the footprint in Texas, but also just the capability to be able to recruit Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, and all those places. And what that does for the SEC is that it brings talent both in football and in basketball, and also a lot of good baseball talent there as well. So I think Texas A&M will be another team that can give maybe Kentucky a run, Tennessee if they get better. I think that Texas A&M could be one of those teams that stays in it for a long time and kind of helps carry the banner for the SEC moving forward.
And we'll have more March Madness discussion here a little bit later on the locker room. But let's move outside to the baseball field. Jacksonville State had a big sweep against Austin Peay this past weekend and moved 6-0 in conference play.
Yeah, and they're really, really hot right now, and they're kind of doing it in different ways than they've normally done it. They normally do it with a lot of good pitching, but right now they're hitting the ball extremely well. They've won 7 of the last 8 games. They lost to Sanford 10-6. In that streak, they scored an average of 11 runs per game, so they're hitting the ball really well. The team batting average is 305. 20 home runs, get this, 48 doubles, 10 triples.
Wow.
You don't normally see that through the first 19 games of the season. They're averaging 8.2 runs per game, so they're really playing well offensively. And a lot of their staple has been on defense and lots of good pitching, great sound defensive play. But Jim Case and his guys have done a good job of hitting the baseball, and that's what's keeping them in these games, and including games that they lose. They lost that game 10-7. I mean, you score 7 runs in most games, you'll win those games. And so I think the future is very, very bright for JSU, both in non-conference and, as you mentioned, in conference play where they're undefeated.
And I know to add on to that, they had a win over Austin Peay 25-12 on Sunday, which shows you about this Jacksonville State Gamecock baseball team. Now moving over to the softball field, they're 3-0 in conference play after sweep against Tennessee Tech this past weekend.
Right, and the way they built their schedule is for conference play. And you can tell the way they built their schedule because of the way that they're playing right now. They've played Missouri, number 16 in the country, Georgia, number 12 in the country, Bama, number 6 in the country, UAB, who's constantly in the regionals, and Florida, the 2-time defending national champions.
Right.
And they held their own against a lot of these schools that will be in the running deep into the Women's College World Series. And so that way they're able to get themselves in position to play teams like Kennesaw State or teams that are now in their conference. And I think that Coach Jana McGinnis has done a pretty good job now as we move and focus now into OVC play. They did a great job in their non-conference to get them set up for conference play, because that's all that matters. Because you win the conference, you get rolling in the conference tournament, then you now have a chance at regionals and super regionals and all of that.
Well, it'll be interesting to see the Jacksonville State softball team in the OVC tournament right down the road here coming up in May. We're going to grab a timeout. When we come back, we got some games to pick, and we'll discuss some more college basketball coming up. Back here in the locker room, Mickey's going to join us this segment to talk some more college basketball. And guys, I know Gerhard and I discussed a little bit last segment, but I was going to ask you, in all your years of watching March Madness, how does this first round, those big upsets, compare to the years past?
Well, I was actually talking to Gerhard about this, I think Monday morning. He came in and I said, have you ever seen anything like this? And I haven't done any comparative analysis to the last few years of the tournament, but just to me, this has been as fun a tournament to watch the first couple of rounds as any that I can ever remember.
And we're going to hop in here and pick some games right now. And first up, we got Kansas and Maryland, Mickey.
Well, I know I'm going to sound like an imbecile here, but I am picking Maryland. But the reason I'm picking them is because I love Mark Turgeon, got to know him real well when he was at JSU, got to do a coach's show with him, and I can't go against Mark Turgeon even though I know Kansas will probably win the game.
Yeah, and I really liked Maryland. I like the way they play, and I like Mark Turgeon with his ties with JSU, but I got to go with the Jayhawks. I think that right now they're surging, and they're playing the kind of basketball that they want to play. So I like the Jayhawks right now and Coach Self, but I will not be surprised because Kansas every now and again will lose games they have no business losing.
I'm with Gerhard in this one. I'm going with the Kansas Jayhawks. Next up, Miami and Villanova. Mickey?
I'm going Villanova, the number 2 seed.
Villanova loses games in the tournament they have no business losing. Last year's the number 1 seed. They lost in the Sweet 16 and other situations. I just think this matchup works well for them against the Hurricanes. I like Villanova in this one only because of the matchup.
I'm with both of y'all right here. I'm going with the number 2 seed, Villanova. Next up, this is an interesting one right here, Oregon and Duke. Mickey?
Well, kind of like the previous game we just picked. The Oregon to me and their football school. I still haven't got bought into the basketball version of this. So I'm going hard to pick against the Blue Devils no matter who they're playing, but especially I'm not really sure Oregon is as good as everybody's saying they are.
We're picking 4 games with the number 1 seed, and I like upsets in 2 of them. This is one of them. I like the Duke Blue Devils. I like Coach K, and I like the way they're playing right now.
I got the Ducks, the number 1 seed, Oregon, in this one. Next up, Texas A&M and Oklahoma.
Well, Oklahoma on my bracket is the pick to win it all. I love Buddy Hield. I just think he is the best player in college basketball. He does what he does when teams are the way teams defend him is basically as close to a boxing one as you'll see. They totally try to take him out of the game. He's a great team player. When he can't score, he affects the game in other ways, and he does it with a great attitude. I like Lon Kruger. I think he's a positive-minded coach, which is so refreshing in the screaming age of coaches these days. I'm going Oklahoma in this one.
Yeah, and I really like, you mentioned Buddy Hield when we were talking about it last week, and he's one of my favorite players, and he's kind of that anomaly where he's a guy who stayed a little bit later. He's not like a Ben Simmons, a one-and-done guy, but I think that his game will transfer into the NBA, and I think you're seeing it right now in this tournament. However, I like the way Texas A&M is playing. I just think that after everything that happened last week, they get a chance to just to relax and be able to spend a couple of days getting back to the way they play basketball, and I think they'll get back to where they were in the SEC tournament in the first round.
And they better win it straight up because they ain't got any more luck in this one after what happened last week.
Yeah.
I'm with Mickey in this one. I'm going with Oklahoma. I got them going pretty far in my bracket as well. Next up, North Carolina and Indiana.
I'm going with the Big Blue, North Carolina, even though Indiana was very impressive in the win over Kentucky, and they're a really good, well-coached team. I just think that North Carolina seems to be on a roll right now.
I think this could be one of the better games of the Sweet 16. Indiana is leading the tournament in scoring per game. North Carolina, number 2, just a hair over 80 points per game. I like the Tar Heels, though, because I like Roy Williams, and I think they'll have just enough to beat Indiana.
I'm going with both of y'all on this one, the Tar Heels as well. Next up, Notre Dame and Wisconsin.
This is tough. I saw both of these teams play last weekend, and really, you could really say both of them coulda, shoulda got beat last week, but they're still alive playing each other. I'm going to go with Wisconsin. I like the way they shoot the ball as a team. I think Notre Dame is, may be a little more, may have the edge in athleticism and size, but I think when it comes down to it, it's a game of shooting, and Wisconsin, they know how to shoot the ball.
Yeah, they do, and I think that there is some kind of rub-over effect from last year. A team that went to the national championship game, barely lost to Duke. A lot of those guys are still on it. I just think that somewhere it's intangible that magic still exists with Wisconsin, and I like the Badgers.
I'm going with Notre Dame in this one, the number 6 seed. Next up, we got Iowa State and Virginia.
This is a tough one for me, but I'm going to go Virginia. Iowa State, I wouldn't be surprised to see them pull it off with the upset, but I'm going to go with the Cavaliers.
I said that there's 2 number 1 seeds that I think will fall. This is the second one. Iowa State is right now scoring the 3rd most points per game in this tournament. There's something about Virginia, I just do not believe in them, and I really don't have a grand, array of evidence to show why I don't. I haven't believed in them really since last year, when the kind of style that they play, I think that a team that can score and score well can beat them. So I like the Cyclones.
I haven't believed in them since Ralph Sampson left, but I'm still going to pick them today.
I got Virginia in this one as well. Next up, and finally, Gonzaga and Syracuse.
Well, I love Gonzaga, love the name, love the mascot. They're kind of one of those teams that in my lifetime got on everybody's radar with the NCAA tournament. They've had some big wins, but I'm going to go with the Big Orange. I think Syracuse. I think that zone, that 2-1-2 zone, will stifle Gonzaga a little bit. I'm going to pick the Orangemen.
That 2-3 zone is one of the toughest things to play against, and I think that teams don't understand it until they get on the floor with Syracuse and just how suffocating that defense is. However, I do like the Bulldogs.
I'm going with the Orange in this one. Syracuse, the number 10 seed. And guys, after looking at some of these games, what are some ones that y'all are really going to pay attention to and coming up this weekend?
I really like that Oklahoma-Texas A&M game. I think that that's one of the games where that team can, if they win, can make a big surge. And I won't be a bit surprised to see one of those teams in the national championship game, the winner of that game being in the national championship.
I won't be surprised to see anything. I'm not so sure that our best games maybe aren't behind us in this tournament. I don't know how we can top what we've seen so far. And what's really been interesting about the tournament to me so far is even the upsets. Those teams that have pulled those upsets,
right,
they came back the next round and either won or could have won again. So I don't see any flukes in this tournament, even though we've had a lot of upsets, and that's what's been entertaining about it to me. But I'm with Gerhard. I guess the marquee game to me, and the seedings kind of imply that, and that's the game with Oklahoma and Texas A&M.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, and we'll talk more about this next week here on The Locker Room. When we come back, it's time for the Locker Room Roundtable. Stay with us. Right back here in the locker room, and it's time for the Locker Room Roundtable. And Tuesday of this week, a big moment in Major League Baseball. For the first time since 1999, the Rays, they went down to Havana to take on Cuba. There's been a lot of people talking about this, whether it's good or bad. The Rays did win the game. What are y'all's thoughts on Rays heading down to Cuba?
I think from a baseball perspective, and I won't get into all the other
Right.
because you could get into politics and national security and all that. It was a very interesting day. It was kind of unfortunate from, I guess, President Obama's perspective that the day got upstaged with what happened with the terrorist attack in Belgium. But from a baseball perspective, I think it's great. I think that it's a market that I know there's a lot of people that will disagree, especially a lot of the Cuban Americans, but I think that it's probably time to see this happen, and not just from a sports perspective, but even economically and business-wise. So I thought it was overall, from a sports perspective, good to see.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think Mickey alluded to it that you can get into some murky waters whenever you talk about this as far as a relationship standpoint between the two, because there are a lot of prisoners, and Fidel Castro's regime has been just, what it's been over the last however many years, 50 years or so. But just to see those moments where players who haven't seen their families in 10, 15 years. I mean, I watched a story about a guy who hasn't seen his child in 7 years and 8 years. Just to see that those stories, those guys and families can now reconnect. It becomes broader than baseball. And obviously, you have the defectors and people, or not the defectors, but the people who are dissenting and the people who don't like the way that the government is in Cuba right now. And there is a human side of it. And there's still a lot of things to work out with a lot of other nations, not just this nation. But I think to see those stories, it kind of elevates this thing, because you hear so many horror stories.
Right.
I mean, Yasiel Puig and all these guys who just risk life and limb just to get to the States and play baseball. And then once they get here, they're able to support and provide for their families back at home. And I just think it's pretty good.
It's kind of like the Olympics. The Olympics have always been, a situation where you try to keep world politics out of it and let the games be the games, no matter what might be going on in the world at the time. You always try to protect the games, no matter what countries may be at odds with each other, whatever. That's kind of how I see this yesterday. If you could separate the sport from all the other issues, and they're legitimate issues, maybe it'll help bridge some of those issues. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, into football now. New Orleans Saints head coach Sean Payton signed a 5-year deal this week. He's been at the Saints for 9 seasons. That's not including the one he was suspended for. What's your thoughts on that, on Sean Payton?
I think he's still one of the smartest guys in football, one of the smartest offensive minds in football. He obviously knows that Drew Brees probably doesn't have 5 years left in him, maybe 2 or 3 good years. So there's obviously a plan in place to get him another quarterback, maybe another franchise guy moving forward. But he flirted with a lot of teams. I mean, and openly, San Francisco 49ers when they were looking for a head coach, the Miami Dolphins when they were looking for a new head coach. I just think that everything from Bounty Gate has now maybe de-escalated a little bit, and now he can, work now with the quarterbacks he wants to work with, because he is a quarterback whisperer, so to speak. And so we'll see what he does after Drew Brees, but I still think for him it's a pretty good move.
Well, clearly this tells me that Brees and Payton have gotten together in a room and they've decided they're going to keep going a little longer, because there's no way, I don't think, that Sean Payton signs a 5-year contract, and there's talk Drew Brees is going to sign a 4-year extension. I don't think either one of them will be in New Orleans for 4 or 5 more years, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 more years. The bottom line is, it tells me they want to try to stay together a little longer, kind of like Belichick Brady, because quarterbacks are so important in this league. So that's what it tells me is what's going on in New Orleans.
And back to some college basketball news now. Jacksonville State now looking for a new men's basketball coach. What are they going to be looking for in this search?
It's so interesting because it's a new athletic director and a new maybe a philosophy about the way JSU basketball should be played. Now they have that brand new Pete Matthews Coliseum. I really can't jump into the minds of the people making these decisions, but I think from just the outside looking in, I think it'll be a situation where they're looking for maybe somebody young who has a little bit of experience on a major program, at a major program with a major coach, so to speak, just somebody who can recruit really well. Because let's keep in mind, the OVC is still a basketball program. It's still a basketball conference. As well as that JSU's done in football, Tennessee State's done in football, EKU, EIU. I still think that they kind of hang their hats on basketball a lot like the ACC in the Power Five. I would think that they would go after somebody young, but I would not be a bit surprised if they go after the coach from Alabama Huntsville, Linnea Cuff, who's been there for, who's been a coach for 25 years, who has a lot of experience and talent on the D1 level. So if they go to the football move with a guy like Bill Clark, who was at a big program from the area, that'll be one thing. If they go with a guy like Linnea Cuff, who's just been seasoned, that's another thing. I think they'll go younger, though. I'm not sure.
I think that's probably what they're thinking. I think it's a situation overall where they'd take the best candidate they could get. Whether you're talking about a guy like James Green, who's when he came, was kind of on the downside of his career. Had already kind of been at some bigger places and was going to and was coming to JSU at that point. The other side is Gerhard's talking. You get somebody young like a Mark Turgeon did when he came. He only stayed a couple of years. The problem there is you get somebody young and up and coming. They may not be there long to have any success at all. Or you get somebody kind of well established that maybe isn't looking to climb the ladder real quickly. That would be a really good option as well. But I think overall they may have an inclination to go young, but I think they'll take the best candidate they can get, obviously.
Well, we'll keep you updated with all that here on The Locker Room. That'll do it for this week's edition. If you want to check out the show again, here are some times you can do so. A few times on Thursday, a couple times on Friday as well, and of course on demand at tv24.tv. Also check us out on social media, Facebook and Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We will be back next week in The Locker Room.